Tight walls. A two-room apartment in the capital's residential district looked just like hundreds of others. A dim stairwell reeking of dampness and cats, battered mailboxes, a worn-out carpet on the steps. On the first floor windows, blinds, on the second, plastic flower pots, and after that it was all the same. Cramped little boxes for living, where entire dramas could unfold inside a single room. In Stephanie's apartment there were only two living spaces. One room belonged to her, the other to her daughter and granddaughter. The kitchen, barely 50 square feet, felt so tight that even the kettle seemed to take up too much space. The hallway was so narrow that if you stretched your arms out, you could touch both walls at once. A faded floral rug lay on the floor, and by the front door stood a cabinet with a broken handle, always cluttered with odds and ends. Keys, leftover change from the store, old receipts. 3 people shared this limited space. Grandmother Stephanie, her daughter Mary, and granddaughter Alina. 3 generations under one roof, and no room for secrets. Every step, every rustle could be heard in the next room. Even phone calls turned into public events, no matter how hard someone tried to whisper. Stephanie loved order. She was born in a time when discipline wasn't just a word but a way to survive. Her mornings always started the same. Pull up the blinds, air out the room, boil water for tea, set cups on the table. Each cup had its place, just like the plates, spoons, towels. Without order, there is no home, she used to say. Sometimes she felt like this habit was the only thing keeping her together. Mary lived differently. Her life was a chain of attempts to start over. Jobs came and went. An office, a shop, some company where she stayed only a few months. Her hobbies never lasted, and her friends drifted in and out like strangers at a train station. She was tired of the stability her mother offered, yet had no strength to build her own. Alina. She quietly watched them both. At 18, no longer a child but not yet an adult, she went to college, came home with books and notes, but her focus was constantly pulled away by the apartment that felt like a cage. The walls pressed on her, draining her thoughts. Even with headphones on in her room, her mother's and grandmother's voices cut through the music. In the evenings, the apartment grew even tighter. Neighbors returned from work, and the building came alive. Footsteps on the stairs, doors slamming, someone yelling at their kids. Inside, tension hung heavy. Stephanie longed for silence, Mary for a phone call, Alina for the moment she could fall asleep and escape the arguments. In that two-room fortress, each lived her own life, yet they were bound inescapably to one another. Stephanie often thought back to the past. Her late husband had been a policeman. Strict, but he never raised his voice without cause. His presence had been the house's guarantee of peace. Now all that remained was his police baton, standing in the closet like a monument to the past. Next to it, an old leather belt he used to wear. Mary hated that belt, remembering the sternness of her childhood. Stephanie kept it as a symbol of the discipline their home now lacked. When she looked at her daughter, it hurt. She had dreamed of another life for Mary, a husband, a family, a warm home. But Mary seemed determined to tear those dreams apart, bringing home one man, then another. At first, Stephanie tried to count them, but soon lost track. Each man left traces in the hallway, unfamiliar shoes, cologne, laughter that echoed late into the night. Alina felt it more sharply than anyone. She blushed with shame when men stared at her too long. She burned with embarrassment hearing neighbors gossip about Mary's life. And she suffered most of all because she couldn't find the strength to tell her mother how much it hurt her. The narrow hallway seemed to grow thick with tension. The apartment, once full of children's laughter and the smell of pies, now felt like a cramped cage with 3 prisoners. And none of them knew how to break free. Stephanie's dreams. Stephanie had strange dreams. Always the same, yet always different. In them, she saw Mary as a little girl with 2 tight braids. Mary ran across the yard, laughing, clutching a doll. Her cheeks glowed pink from running, her eyes sparkled with trust. Life in those dreams felt simple. The girl would grow up, go to school, then college, find a good man who would love and protect her. And later, Stephanie would cradle her grandchildren and quietly rejoice that her child was happy. The dreams were sweet, but waking was bitter. Upon opening her eyes, she saw a very different Mary. Tired, restless, her voice weary, her gaze full of disappointment. Sometimes her daughter's eyes lit up, but it wasn't joy, it was fleeting hope tied to yet another man, who would appear and disappear. Stephanie had long stopped counting them. My God, how many have there been? She asked herself in the sleepless dark. 10, 15, maybe more. And all of them gone without a trace. Just footsteps in the hallway, the smell of cheap cigarettes or cologne, and laughter spilling until dawn. She couldn't accept it. Not because she condemned a woman's right to her own life. She knew loneliness weighed on the soul like a stone. But all of it happened before Alina's eyes. Alina was still a girl, still a child at heart. At 18, she hadn't yet learned to trust, or to protect herself. And all this, in a two-room apartment where even breathing was shared. Stephanie remembered her own youth. She had married John at 21. A policeman, strict, but fair. He didn't drink, didn't shout, never raised a hand. Neighbors feared him because he wore the uniform, but at home he was her calm harbor. His one law was honesty. Better to be poor than dishonest, he used to say. And Stephanie had believed it with all her heart. With him, she felt safe. Even when money was short, when she had to mend an old coat or stretch bread, she knew he would never betray her. Their home was built on respect and quiet love. John loved their daughter too, though not with sweet words. His love was in his actions. Buying a schoolbook, fixing a doll, taking her to the ice rink. Now he was just a memory, lying in the forest cemetery beneath a modest stone. Sometimes Stephanie visited and whispered, "You'd know how hard it is now, John. Mary won't listen, Alina is growing so fast, and I don't know what to tell her. If only you were here, things would be different." Her life seemed to hang only on those dreams, on the image of Mary as a child and John as a protector. In reality, she was just an old woman with tired, trembling hands, her heart bleeding bitterness each day. At night, she sat on the couch, the TV droning, though she barely heard it. Her thoughts circled the same questions. What will become of Mary? What will become of Alina? How much longer will we live inside these walls that squeeze us like a vice? She remembered how she once wished for Mary to have a real life. A wedding, a husband, a happy family, a home of her own. She had even imagined herself visiting, bringing a bag of pies, watching grandchildren run and laugh, seeing Mary gaze at her husband with love. In her dreams, she was always a happy mother and grandmother. But reality had turned out differently. The wedding was small and short-lived. Mary's husband vanished so quickly Stephanie barely had time to learn who he was. All that remained was little Alina, and Mary's endless attempts to find love again. But love can't be built on haste, on late-night flings, on strangers' shoes left in the hallway. And every night, Stephanie woke to footsteps. She felt those steps tearing not only through the silence, but through her own heart. She would get up, walk down the hallway, touch the closet where the police baton and old belt lay. They were symbols of past order, reminders that once this home had rules. She never lifted them, never took them in her hands, just looked, and it weighed heavier on her heart. Because she knew, neither the baton nor the belt could save Mary. Neither could protect Alina. What was needed was something else. Love, conversation, respect. But how to teach that, when Mary wouldn't listen, and Alina stayed silent? Stephanie lay back down and closed her eyes. And the dreams returned, bright as a sunny childhood. Sometimes she wished she wouldn't wake up at all. Because in her dreams, Mary was always happy. Footprints in the hallway. The hallway of their apartment had always been narrow, but lately it seemed even tighter to Alina. It felt as if it shrank every time a new man appeared in the house. Strange shoes by the door, the foreign scent of cologne or alcohol, an unfamiliar voice echoing off the walls. And those traces lingered even after the guest left. The smell hung in the air, and the silence that followed was so heavy she could hear her own thoughts. Alina had learned to move through the hallway without touching the walls. She slipped past like a shadow, avoiding her mother's eyes whenever another visitor arrived. She had her own room, a small space she called her hideout. There was a bed, a desk stacked with books, a laptop, and a few photos on the wall. But even there she never felt free. Sounds seeped through the thin walls, her mother's laughter and whispers carrying so clearly that Alina sometimes took off her headphones because there was no point in wearing them. She was ashamed. Ashamed not only of herself, but in front of the neighbors too. The women in the courtyard liked to sit on benches and share gossip. Alina knew they talked about Mary. She felt as though every gaze was on her whenever she stepped outside. That's the girl whose mother has a new man every week. She walked quickly, eyes down, trying not to meet anyone's look. Her life outside was completely different. At college she did well, though she didn't have many friends. People thought she was quiet, even withdrawn. She never told anyone about her home life. Why would she? Who would understand? She was afraid her classmates might find out about her mother and start mocking her. So her world shrank to books, music, and short walks when she could imagine being someone else. Alina often looked at herself in the mirror. A girl with dark hair and big eyes stared back, eyes that seemed to see more than they should. She felt she was growing up faster than her peers. 18, legally an adult, yet inside still a teenager craving protection. Protection that should have come from home. But home had become the place where she felt most vulnerable. When her mother brought men home, Alina hid. She locked her door, turned on music, and lay on the bed. She was ashamed even to breathe too loudly, afraid someone beyond the wall might hear she was still awake. She wished her mother would behave differently. Not because she envied her or wanted to control her life. No. She only wanted respect. For herself, for her grandmother, for their home. One night, stepping out for water, she caught a man staring at her. His gaze lingered too long, too appraising. Cold fear ran through her. She grabbed a glass and rushed back to her room, but the feeling stayed with her all night. She couldn't sleep. It seemed as if the walls had turned transparent, as though her private space had been invaded without permission. From then on she avoided the hallway even more. When she heard someone arrive, she waited for hours until the silence returned. Sometimes she sat on the floor in her room, doodling meaningless patterns in her notebook, trying not to cry. She loved her grandmother, but even her grandmother's scolding of Mary didn't help. The arguments only grew louder, and Alina felt guilty. After all, those fights happened because of her. Grandma would say, "Not in front of the child." Mother would shout back, "She's an adult already." And Alina sat there, feeling like nothing more than the excuse for their anger. The hallway carried traces, not only physical ones like shoes or scents. It held imprints on her soul. She had learned to fear that space. Even when it was empty, it carried the shadows of strangers. Each time she passed through, her chest tightened, as if she were crossing into forbidden ground. She dreamed of escaping. Finishing college, finding a job, renting a room, anywhere, as long as it wasn't here. In her imagination, it was a small apartment with a window overlooking a park, quiet nights without disturbance. But the dream felt distant. Money was scarce, barely enough for textbooks, let alone rent. So she stayed. And every night, she fell asleep thinking, maybe tomorrow things will change. Maybe Mom will understand. But tomorrow always brought another man. And the hallway filled again with foreign footprints. Relics. In the wardrobe in the living room, on the top shelf beneath an old blanket, two objects lay hidden with a weight of their own, a police baton and a leather belt. To an outsider, they might look like random leftovers, an old keepsake from another life and a worn-out accessory. But to this family they were two symbols, two memories, two stories that refused to let go. The baton had belonged to John, Stephanie's husband. He brought it home the day he retired. "I won't be needing this anymore," he said, placing it on top of the wardrobe. John had always taken his work seriously, but never with cruelty. He never liked using force. "The baton is for order, not punishment," he used to say. In his hands, it never seemed threatening. Rather, it was a sign that someone knew how to keep things under control. When John died, the baton remained. Stephanie never threw it away. To her, it was a piece of his life, his service. Every time she saw it, she felt as if he were still close, that he wouldn't have let the family fall apart. The belt carried a different story. A thick, dark brown leather belt with a heavy metal buckle. John had worn it most of his life. For Mary, it was the symbol of severity. As a child, she often saw it around his waist and trembled when he took it off at night. Though John almost never used it to punish her, its very presence was enough to remind her that there were limits. Mary grew up with a deep protest against that belt. She promised herself her child would never live in fear. She remembered trying to appear obedient just to avoid getting in trouble. Even though her father disciplined more with words than with force, the shadow of that belt left a mark on her memory. For Stephanie, the belt meant something else. It was a sign of order, of discipline, proof that someone was responsible for keeping the family in line. She never saw it as a threat. She saw it as the framework that held their lives together. Sometimes she even thought the belt had saved Mary from mistakes in her youth. Fear has its place too, she believed, though deep down she knew love was more important. Alina, though, saw them differently. Both the baton and the belt were foreign symbols to her. She had no real memories of her grandfather. He died when she was just a child. She only knew him from her grandmother's stories, which felt like fairy tales. To her, the baton was just a dusty stick, and the belt an outdated relic. Yet she noticed how her grandmother touched them whenever she was anxious, and she understood. For Stephanie, they were more than objects. They were her thread to the past, her way of holding on. An unspoken rule existed in the family: don't touch those things. They lay in their place like two silent guards. When Stephanie cleaned the wardrobe, she carefully lifted them down, dusted them, and put them back with quiet reverence, like a ritual. Mary only sneered. You still keep that old junk? What for? She never dared to throw them out, knowing it would break her mother. But she never shared her sentiment either. One day, during a heated argument, Stephanie suddenly opened the wardrobe and pulled out the belt. She had no intention of using it, but just holding it showed her desperation. Mary laughed bitterly. Seriously, Mom? You want to discipline me with a belt at 40? Her laughter was sharp, cruel. Stephanie immediately put it back, but the moment left her with a crushing sense of defeat. She realized the symbols of the past no longer held any power in the present. Alina had seen it accidentally, and for the first time she wondered, maybe the baton and the belt were the very reason for their conflict. To her grandmother, they symbolized order. To her mother, oppression. To her, they meant nothing at all. 3 generations, 3 truths, and no winner. Yet every night, when the shouting stopped and the hallway fell silent, Stephanie passed by the wardrobe, her eyes lingering on those relics. She sighed, thinking, if John were here, he'd pick up that baton, tap it against the floor, and order would return. But John was gone. Only the objects remained. And in the silence, they weighed heavier than any words. The argument behind the door. The evening in the apartment began quietly. Twilight was falling outside the window, children's laughter still echoed in the yard, and the kitchen smelled of fried potatoes. Stephanie sat at the table, slicing bread into even pieces, waiting for her granddaughter to return from her lessons. She loved this time, the brief hour before night, when the home still clung to ordinary sounds. Mary burst in suddenly, like a gust of wind. She wore a short dress, her lips painted bright red, music blaring from her phone. Stephanie glanced at her, and from her daughter's eyes alone, she understood. Mary was heading out again. Why don't you at least eat something? She said quietly. Mom, I'm not hungry. Mary brushed her off and went straight to her room. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. Stephanie froze, knife in hand. The chime was short but insistent. A man's voice carried through the hallway. Mary, open up. It's me. Stephanie stood, wiped her hands on a towel, and walked toward the door. When Mary rushed over, her mother managed to block her way. Who is it? she asked sternly. Mom, it's none of your business. Step aside, Mary snapped. I won't let you. I can't stand this shame anymore. Stephanie's voice broke. It seemed to her the neighbors must be hearing yet another scene erupting in their home. Mary pressed her lips tight, her eyes flashing. You drove me to this, she shouted. You've lived your whole life by rules and order, but I don't want that. I want to live, don't you get it? This is living. Stephanie pointed toward the door. Strange men, laughter in the hallway, while your daughter hides in her room, too scared to step out into the corridor? Leave Alina out of this. She's grown up, she understands everything herself. At that moment, the door to the girls' room opened. Alina peeked out, her face pale, a notebook in her hands. She said nothing, but her gaze spoke louder than any reproach. Stephanie saw her granddaughter swallow hard before retreating again, closing the door softly. The silence on the other side was a stronger argument than any shouting. You see, the mother whispered. She's ashamed of you. Mary clenched her fists. She's ashamed of herself, not me. You planted that shame in her with your endless lectures. And you're killing her faith in love. You're turning her into a shadow. The man at the door knocked again, impatient, louder this time. Mary lunged for the handle, but Stephanie grabbed her wrist. The old woman's strength was unexpected. Her hands trembled, yet her grip was firm. Don't you dare, she rasped. Don't you dare drag this filth into our home. Mary shoved her mother hard. Stephanie staggered, bracing against the wall. For a moment, silence reigned, only the sound of footsteps outside and the women's heavy breathing. You never loved me, Mary spat. Rules and discipline were always more important to you. You respected Dad more than you ever cared about me. You're lying, Stephanie fought back tears. My whole life I gave up for you. You buried my life under your rules, Mary shot back, yanking the door open. A tall man stood there, dressed in a sports jacket, a beer bottle in hand. He smiled, but upon seeing Stephanie, his expression faltered. Evening, he muttered. Come in, don't mind her, Mary said, pulling him toward her room. Stephanie remained in the hallway. Her heart pounded so loudly she barely heard the door slam again. She sank onto a chair by the wardrobe and closed her eyes. Her hands reached automatically for the cabinet, pulling out a belt. The old one, with the worn buckle. She held it without knowing why. Not for punishment. No. Just to feel there was still something left to hold on to. But the belt slipped through her fingers and fell to the floor. Its thud echoed longer than the laughter coming from the next room. Alina peeked out again. She saw her grandmother's empty gaze, the belt on the floor. Fear crept over her. Quietly, she walked over, picked up the belt, and set it back on the wardrobe. Then she wrapped her arms around her grandmother. Grandma, don't, she whispered. I'll endure. We'll endure together. Stephanie nodded, but she knew, this argument had only just begun. Shadows of the past. Mary lay awake long into the night. In the next room, the man she'd brought home was already snoring, but she stared at the ceiling. Every quarrel with her mother tore open something old inside her, something that never healed. At times she felt she wasn't even living in the present, but trapped back in her childhood, which refused to let her go. She was about 9. Summer. Heat. She and her parents had gone to her grandmother's village. Among the gardens and flowers, the world seemed brighter. But that was when Mary first felt the chill of her mother's gaze. She had been playing by the river with other kids. The boys laughed, splashing water, and she, happy, didn't want to go home. But when she returned, Stephanie was already waiting by the gate. Her face was stern. Where were you? She asked sharply, though her voice was low. At the river, Mom. We were swimming. Do you know how to swim? No, but it wasn't deep. Stephanie silently took her daughter by the hand, led her inside, and said, I told you not to go without permission. You could have drowned. But I didn't, I'm fine, Mary tried to explain. What she wanted was for her mother to hug her, to say, I was scared for you. Instead, Stephanie pulled a belt from her father's trousers. So you'll remember, she said. She struck only once, but it was enough for Mary to remember forever. Not because it hurt, but because she realized her mother feared shame or disobedience more than she cared about her daughter's happiness. Another memory. 5th grade. The boys at school laughed at Mary's old coat, one she'd worn since last year. She came home in tears. Mom, they made fun of me. Said I look poor in this coat. Stephanie didn't even glance her way. Let them laugh. What matters is that the coat is warm. People will always find something to pick at. But I'm embarrassed, Mom. Shame should come from your actions, not your clothes. The words were logical, wise even. But they carried no sympathy. What little Mary longed for was a hug and a promise. Don't cry, I'll get you a new one. That never came. And the cold lessons stayed with her forever. There was no warmth to expect from her mother. The most painful memory was from her youth. Mary was 17, in love for the first time. A tall, cheerful boy from another class who wrote her notes and walked her home. She glowed with happiness, her heart racing. The first time he came to their home, Stephanie met him with a cold stare. She didn't invite him to sit, didn't ask a thing. She only pulled Mary aside and said, Forget him. He has no education, no future. He's not good enough for you. But I love him. Mary cried desperately. Love isn't what matters. What matters is building a family on something solid. For the first time, Mary screamed at her mother. For the first time ever. But her cries broke against a wall. The boy never came back. And Mary swore then and there, she would never again let her mother decide whom she could love. These shadows of the past followed her always. They explained her choices, her rebellion, her endless clashes with Stephanie. Every man in her life was less about love than a challenge, a way to prove, look, I can choose for myself. Your rules mean nothing to me. But every night, when she was alone, Mary felt the emptiness. None of those men gave her the warmth she had once craved from her mother. She chased the thought away with wine, with laughter louder than needed, but inside, she remained the little girl who had only ever wanted an embrace. That night, as her mother sat in the hallway and she lay beside a stranger, Mary realized, she was still living with those shadows. She was building her life out of defiance, not for herself. And what scared her most was that her daughter saw it all. Maybe Mom's right, the thought struck. Maybe I really am ruining Alina. She turned on her side, pressed her face into the pillow. But sleep didn't come, only memories. And from them, there was no escape.